I was only the harbor girl they blamed for ruining their family name. My mother-in-law smiled and said her son deserved better. Until the judge opened my sealed file and their perfect lie started sinking in front of everyone. My name is Hollis Fenwick, and for 3 years, the richest family in Brindle Harbor let people believe I had nearly destroyed their name with one careless mistake. They said I was the dock girl who married above herself, the wife who embarrassed a respected boatyard family, the woman my husband had been kind enough to keep even after she ruined him. I never shouted back. I never stood in the middle of town and told people what I knew. I kept my head down, went to work, paid my bills, and waited for the truth to find the right room. Then, on a cold morning outside courtroom 4, my mother-in-law looked at me in front of half the county courthouse and said, "My son should have married someone better." 5 minutes later, Judge Lyndon Arkwright opened my sealed file, and Vesta Rusk learned something her polished family had forgotten. The sea keeps what sinks, but paper remembers what people bury. Before I tell you what was inside that file, you need to understand the kind of place Brindle Harbor is. It sits on the Maine coast, all gray water, white houses, sharp wind, and people who can tell what kind of storm is coming by the smell of the air. In summer, tourists fill the sidewalks with linen shirts and camera bags. In winter, the town belongs to the people who work there, the ones who salt their own steps and keep jumper cables in the trunk. My father repaired lobster traps and ran small boats when the weather allowed. My mother cleaned vacation homes for families who arrived with 6 suitcases and left with complaints about sand in the hallway. I grew up around rope burns, radiostatic diesel, tide charts, and men who measured honesty by whether you showed up before sunrise when someone needed help. I was not beautiful in the way rich women in our town were allowed to be beautiful. I did not float into rooms. I entered them with a clipboard, a weather report, and practical shoes. By 26, I was working nights at the harbor office, logging departures, checking safety calls, answering radio traffic, and making sure nobody went out when the fog was too thick to forgive mistakes. I liked records because records did not care who your father was. A timestamp was a timestamp. A call sign was a call sign. A signature either belonged to you or it did not. My father had given me an old brass compass when I got that job. It had a dent on one side and a tiny scratch across the glass. "When people get loud," he told me, "look for north." I carried it in my coat pocket for years, touching it whenever I needed to remember that panic has never saved anybody from a storm. I met Kieran Rusk during one of those storms. His family owned Rusk and Kiel, the biggest private boatyard between our harbor and the next 2 counties. They repaired yachts, stored winter vessels, handled luxury charters, and acted as if the coastline itself had been waiting for their permission to exist. Kieran walked into the harbor office one October night, with rain shining on his shoulders and a smile that made him look less rich than he was. He needed an emergency mooring approval for a damaged client vessel, and I told him no because the wind was turning and the channel lights were half blind in the rain. Most men like him would have pushed. Kieran laughed softly and said, "Then tell me what keeps my people alive, Miss Fenwick." I remember that because it felt like respect. I did not know yet that some men call it respect when they are only learning where your locked doors are. For the first year, he was sweet in a careful way. He brought coffee to the harbor office. He asked about my father's hands when arthritis got into them. He came to my mother's little yellow house and ate haddock stew at a table with one uneven leg. He listened when I talked about weather systems and safety rules. When he asked me to marry him, he did it on the pier before sunrise, with gulls screaming like unpaid witnesses above us. I said yes because I thought love meant being seen clearly and chosen anyway. I did not think about how different our worlds were. I had spent my whole life around people who fixed what was broken. I did not know what to do with people who hid the brake and blamed the person standing closest. Vesta Rusk knew what to do with me the first time she saw me. She smiled like a silver knife and said, "So you are the harbor girl." Not Hollis, not Kieran's fiancé. The harbor girl. She was tall, narrow, and always dressed like she was about to be photographed beside a donation check. Her hair never moved, even in wind. She ran the Rusk family without holding an official title, which meant she could control everything and be blamed for nothing. At our engagement dinner, she placed me between a retired admiral and Farron Bellwether, the woman she had always wanted Kieran to marry. Farron came from old yacht money, the kind that did not need to announce itself because every dock already knew its name. She wore cream silk and asked me whether night shifts at the harbor office were emotionally difficult for someone without formal polish. Kieran squeezed my knee under the table and told me later that his mother just needed time. I believed him because believing him hurt less than seeing the truth. Marriage did not make Vesta kinder. It only made her more creative. At family dinners, she corrected my forks, my shoes, my pronunciation of French menu items, even the way I folded napkins. She told people I was refreshingly simple, which sounded like praise until you heard the pause after it. She kept a framed photo of Kieran and Farron at some sailing gala on the piano, and moved our wedding picture to a side hallway where delivery men were more likely to see it than guests. I tried to laugh it off. I told myself old families are strange, mothers are protective, and love is patient. But patience can become a room where people store all the things they do not want to face. Mine filled up quietly. Kieran changed after the wedding, not all at once, but enough that I noticed. He still touched my back when we entered rooms. He still called me whole when we were alone. But when Vesta made a cruel remark, he looked away. When Farron showed up at yacht club events, he did not seem surprised. When I asked why his mother kept comparing me to a woman he had supposedly never wanted, he told me I was letting insecurity make me unkind. That became his favorite trick. Every concern I had turned into a flaw inside me. If I asked a question, I was suspicious. If I stayed quiet, I was cold. If I worked late, I was avoiding family. If I came to dinner tired, I was proving Vesta right. Slowly, I started measuring myself against a standard no one had written down, because they wanted the power to move it whenever I got close. The night of the Salt Lark accident began with fog so thick it made the harbor lights look like candles behind dirty glass. I was working the desk with an old radio that hissed every few seconds and a pot of coffee strong enough to qualify as punishment. Around 11:40, a call came in from a smaller boat near the breakwater. A vessel had struck the rocks, no fire, but possible injuries. I pulled the log, checked the active departures, and felt my stomach tighten because the Salt Lark was not listed as out. It was a Rusk vessel, a sleek white charter boat that should have been locked at the private dock. I called the emergency response line, then Rusk and Keel, then Kieran. He did not answer the first time. He did not answer the second. When he finally picked up, there was wind in the background and a silence after I said the boat's name that I would remember for the rest of my life. By dawn, everything had already started turning away from the truth. Vesta arrived at the harbor office before the sun came up, wearing a black wool coat and carrying a leather folder. 2 men in suits came behind her. Kieran arrived 30 minutes later. Pale, quiet. With a cut near his eyebrow, he said, "Came from slipping on the dock when he heard the news." Huxley Parr, an old deckhand who had been pulled from the injured boat, was taken to a clinic inland. Nobody would let me speak to him. By noon, I had been asked for my access card. By 3, my supervisor told me I was being placed on leave until the investigation was complete. By evening, a story had entered Brindle Harbor like a bad tide. Hollis Fenwick Rusk had released the Salt Lark without proper clearance. Hollis had failed to record the departure. Hollis had made a mistake that could have killed people. I remember standing in my kitchen that night while Kieran leaned against the counter, looking devastated in a way that made me comfort him before I understood I was the one bleeding. He said he was sorry. He said accidents got messy. He said the family lawyers would try to protect me. But I needed to stay quiet because anything I said could make it worse. I told him I had not released that boat. He closed his eyes like I had slapped him with my innocence. "Whole," he said, soft and tired. "Your code was used." I told him codes could be stolen, copied, entered by someone else. He looked at me with such sorrow that I almost doubted myself. That is how good he was. He did not have to call me a liar. He only had to look heartbroken that I would not accept the lie. The investigation moved in a way I did not understand then. My access code appeared in a departure request. A log entry had been changed. The harbor office could not prove who sat at the terminal. The Rusk lawyers gave statements, produced corrected records, and spoke in polished phrases about unfortunate procedural failures. I lost my job before the final report was even finished. There was no dramatic firing, just a letter, a handshake, and a sentence about public trust. Vesta visited our house that night and stood in my living room like she owned the floor beneath it. "My son is choosing to stand by you," she said. "A better woman would understand what that costs him." I should have thrown her out. Instead, I stood there with my father's compass in my pocket and said nothing because I was still foolish enough to believe silence looked like dignity. For the next 2 years, Kieran wore my disgrace like a medal. At events, people praised him for his loyalty. Vesta told anyone who would listen that marriage was a sacred duty and her son had carried his with grace. Farron bellwethers started appearing more often, always at the edges of rooms, always with eyes that slid away when mine found them. Once, at a fundraiser for coastal preservation, I overheard Vesta say, "Farron always understood our world. Some women are born with the right instincts." I was standing 10 feet away, holding a plastic cup of lemonade, and everyone pretended not to hear. That is the cruelty of polite rooms. They do not make scenes. They just make space for your humiliation to sit down beside you. What nobody knew was that I had kept copies. Not because I planned revenge, but because records had been my work and habits are hard to kill. I had copies of my shift schedule, the radio timestamps, the original storm advisory, and a screenshot of the departure dashboard from before the system updated. It did not prove everything. It did not name the person who changed the log, but it proved enough to keep my own mind from breaking. On nights when Kieran came home smelling like expensive whiskey and Farron's perfume, I opened that folder and reminded myself that truth had not disappeared just because rich people had locked it in a room. The marriage ended the way weak men end things. With paperwork he did not hand me himself. Kieran filed for divorce in early March, while the harbor was still half frozen, and the tourists had not yet returned to make everything look harmless. His petition painted him as patient, generous, wounded. He claimed I had damaged his family's public standing. He claimed the old maritime file showed a pattern of poor judgment. He asked the court to limit my share of marital assets connected to Rusk and Keel because, according to his lawyer, I had already caused the company significant reputational harm. I sat at my kitchen table and read those words twice. Then I laughed once, not because it was funny, but because my body had no better place to put the insult. He had taken my job, my name, my peace, and now he wanted to charge me for the weight of the lie he had made me carry. My lawyer was Jovi Hartwell, a woman with cropped gray blonde hair, square glasses, and the calmest hands I had ever seen outside a surgeon or a fisherman tying knots in bad weather. Her office was above a bait shop that sold coffee, rain gear, and sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. She read Kieran's filing without changing expression. Then she looked at me and said, "They are trying to use the sealed accident file as a character weapon." I nodded because that much was obvious. Jovi tapped one finger on the page. "Good," she said, "because if they make it relevant, we can ask what is actually inside." I stared at her. For years, that sealed file had been a locked door in my mind. Something official I was not allowed to see. Something people had used against me while refusing to show me its face. Jovi leaned back and said, "People who lie around documents often forget documents have edges. Push wrong and they cut." That was the first day I felt something close to hope, though I did not trust it yet. Jovi filed a response demanding that if Kieran intended to rely on the accident file, the court should review the complete record, not a family-friendly version produced by Rusk lawyers. Kieran's side fought it. They called it unnecessary. They called it invasive. They said the file was confidential for safety and settlement reasons. Jovi said confidentiality was not a shield for selective character assassination. Judge Lyndon Arkwright scheduled a hearing. I did not sleep much the night before it. I ironed a navy dress, polished my plain shoes, and placed my father's brass compass in my coat pocket. I did not bring it for luck. Luck had never done much for women like me. I brought it because I wanted something honest touching my hand when the room filled with people who had believed I was not. The courthouse in Brindle Harbor is older than good plumbing and colder than it has any right to be in spring. That morning, the hallway smelled like wet wool, old paper, and burned coffee from the machine near the clerk's window. Vesta arrived like she had been summoned for a portrait, not a hearing. Her coat was winter white, her pearls small and perfect, her mouth arranged into sympathy she did not feel. Kieran stood beside her in a dark suit, looking thinner than I remembered. Farron Bellwether sat on a bench near the courtroom doors, cream scarf folded at her throat, eyes fixed on her phone. She did not look at me. People rarely look at the person carrying their secret. If there is still a chance, the secret will stay carried. Vesta stopped directly in front of me. She let her eyes move from my shoes to my face, slow enough to make sure everyone nearby understood there was a judgment happening. "You know," she said, not loudly, but clear enough for the lawyers, clerks, and waiting strangers to hear, "my son should have married someone better." The hallway went still in that small town way, where nobody moves because nobody wants to admit they are listening. Kieran said nothing. Farron's thumb froze on her phone. I touched the compass in my pocket and felt the dent beneath my finger. For a second, I saw all of it at once. Every dinner where I had swallowed a remark, every job I had lost, every door that had closed because the Rusk name had needed a place to put its dirt. I looked at Vesta and said, "Maybe we are about to find out what better means." Then the courtroom doors opened. Judge Arkwright did not waste time. He was a narrow man with tired eyes and a voice that made interruption feel foolish. Kieran's lawyer began by saying the old accident record spoke directly to my judgment, responsibility, and credibility. He said my past conduct had placed strain on the Rusk family and business. He said Kieran had shown unusual loyalty by remaining married after an incident that could have permanently harmed the company. Vesta sat behind him with her chin raised, almost smiling. I watched Jovi write one word on her legal pad. Opened. Then she stood and said, "Your Honor, if opposing counsel wants to rely on that file, we ask that the court review the full sealed record, including the protected witness statement, original access audit, and insurance correspondence." Kieran turned his head so quickly I heard the chair creak. There are silences that are empty, and there are silences that are full of people realizing they have walked too far out on thin ice. This was the second kind. Kieran's lawyer objected. He said the request was broader than necessary. Jovi held up Kieran's own filing and read the lines where they had accused me of poor judgment and reputational harm. "They cannot use the shadow of a file to stain my client," she said, "then object when the court turns on the light." Judge Arkwright looked down at the papers for a long moment. Then he ordered the sealed file brought in from Chambers, where it had been delivered under protective rules the week before. I felt the courtroom change before anything was read. Vesta's smile vanished. Farron finally looked up. Kieran put one hand flat against the table as if the room had tilted. The judge opened the file slowly. That is the detail I remember most. Not a dramatic rip, not a sudden reveal. Just an old folder opening under quiet hands. The first document was the final investigative summary. Judge Arkwright read silently at first, then aloud only where necessary. The report did not list me as the responsible party. It said the harbor office night dispatcher had followed emergency response procedure after the distress call. It said the departure entry connected to my access code showed signs of manual alteration after the initial event. It said the original system audit was incomplete in the copy first provided by Rusk and Keel. My name, the name Brindle Harbor had dragged through 3 years of side-eyes and half-sympathy, appeared in the report as a cooperating employee and later as a protected witness. Vesta made a small sound behind Kieran. Not a word. just the beginning of one that had nowhere safe to go. Judge Arkwright continued. The complete access audit showed a secondary administrative override from a terminal inside the Rusk and Keel private office at 11:18 p.m., 22 minutes before the first distress call. The override had been linked to an executive credential, Kieran's credential. His lawyer stood so fast his chair scraped the floor. Your Honor, that credential may have been used by staff? The judge looked at him over the folder. Then your client can explain why his sworn statement said he was home at that hour. Nobody breathed in the first row. Kieran's face had gone the strange gray color of wet ash. Jovi did not smile. That is why I trusted her. She did not enjoy the wound. She only made sure it was seen. She asked the court to review the protected witness statement. Judge Arkwright turned another page. Huxley Parr's name appeared, and with it came a night I had only known through rumors. Huxley had been hired to do late repair work on the Salt Lark. He stated that Kieran Rusk boarded the vessel after hours with an unidentified female passenger. He stated that Kieran appeared impatient, smelled of alcohol, and told him the trip would be short and private. He stated that when fog thickened, Kieran insisted on moving anyway. After the crash, while Huxley was injured, Kieran told him the family would take care of him if he kept the passenger's name out of it. The passenger was later identified in a supplemental statement as Farron Bellwether. Farron stood up halfway, then sat back down as if her own knees had remembered the law before she did. Vesta turned toward her, and for the first time since I had known that family, I saw surprise on Vesta's face that was not performance. She had known parts of the lie. I could see that. She had helped shape the story around me, but she had not known every piece. Maybe Kieran had kept Farron's presence from her at first. Maybe Vesta had guessed and chosen not to ask. Rich families call that discretion. Poor families call it what it is, looking away because the truth is expensive. The judge read the insurance correspondence next. It showed that Rusk and Keel had submitted a corrected timeline after the accident, one that shifted responsibility away from Kieran's executive credential and toward a harbor office clearance error. Attached to that correction was a memo from Vesta's private office. Not signed by her, not directly. Vesta was too careful for that. But the memo came from her assistant, using language no assistant would invent alone. Narrative risk must be contained before public filings. I watched those words land in the room. Narrative risk. That was me. Not a wife, not a person, a risk to be contained. Kieran's lawyer asked for a recess. Judge Arkwright denied it for the moment. He said the court would not continue character arguments based on a file that appeared to contradict the party relying on it. Then, he said the matter might require referral for review of false statements, insurance misrepresentation, and possible discovery sanctions. Those words were clean and legal and almost gentle, but they hit the Rusk table like stones dropped through glass. Kieran whispered something to his lawyer. Vesta reached for her purse, then stopped, because there was nowhere in that room to hide a shaking hand. Farron stared at the floor with the blank look of a woman calculating how quickly a family like hers could deny knowing her. I thought I would feel victory. For years, I had imagined the truth arriving like a storm, loud enough to shake windows. But when it came in pages, stamps, dates, and a judge's tired voice. I felt less like cheering than sitting down after carrying something heavy across a long distance. My anger was there, but it was not wild. It had grown disciplined from waiting. It knew where to stand. I looked at Kieran, and for a moment I remembered the man in the rain who had asked me what kept people alive. The answer had been simple then. Rules, records, honesty. He had known the answer and chosen the opposite. Vesta stood before anyone could stop her. "This is being twisted," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it had lost its polish. "My family has served this harbor for decades. My son would never—" Judge Arkwright cut her off with one look. "Mrs. Rusk, sit down." She did not sit. She turned toward me, and there it was again, the old instinct. When truth threatened her son, she reached for me. "You," she said, her voice breaking sharp at the edge. "You have wanted to shame us from the beginning. I stood, because something in me knew the moment had come, and because my father had not raised me to let another person point at me with their dirt still under their nails. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. "Vesta," I said, "you were right about one thing." The courtroom went so quiet I could hear rain ticking against the windows. "Your son should have married someone better." Kieran closed his eyes. Vesta stared at me like she thought I had finally agreed to be small. I looked past her just once, at Farron, then back again. But better women do not let innocent people carry their lies, and better men do not ask them to. I sat down before she could answer. The judge told the room to remain silent, but the silence had already changed. For the first time in years, it was not protecting them. The hearing did not end with screaming. Real endings rarely do. They end with lawyers asking for copies, judges setting deadlines, and people gathering their coats with hands that do not quite work right. Kieran's side withdrew the character claim before noon. By evening, everyone in Brindle Harbor knew the sealed file had not condemned me. It had cleared me. Within a week, the divorce case changed shape. Kieran stopped asking the court to punish me for reputational harm. Rusk and Keel's insurance carrier requested records. The Harbor Authority reopened the old internal matter. Huxley Parr's statement, once buried under confidentiality and settlement language, became the name people whispered with a different tone. Farron's family released a statement so empty it could have floated away in a puddle. Vesta did not appear at the yacht club luncheon that month. For once, the room she had ruled learned how to talk without her permission. Jovi called me 2 weeks later to say the Harbor Authority had issued a corrected letter for my employment file. It did not apologize in the way people apologize in movies. Institutions rarely kneel. But it said the prior concerns regarding my conduct were unsupported by the complete record. It said I had followed emergency procedure. It said my access credentials had been used in a manner inconsistent with my physical location and shift activity. It said enough. I held the letter at my kitchen table and read it 3 times. Then I put my head down on my arms and cried, not because I was weak, but because I was finally somewhere safe enough to stop being strong for a minute. Kieran came to the house once after that. He looked older in daylight, or maybe I had stopped lending him the glow of who I thought he could be. He stood on the porch with his hands in his coat pockets and said he never meant for it to go that far. I almost laughed because that is what people say when the damage arrives at their own door. They never mean for it to go that far. They only mean for the lie to work. He said his mother had pushed. He said Farron had panicked. He said the lawyers had handled things. He placed blame around the room like furniture, anywhere but at his own feet. I let him finish. Then I said, "You let me lose my name so you could keep yours." He looked down. There was nothing left after that. No final embrace, no dramatic curse. Just a man on a porch realizing the woman he had used as a shield had stepped away, and now the weather was his. Vesta never apologized. I did not expect her to. A month after the hearing, she sent a note through her attorney, offering a private statement that she regretted any misunderstanding. Jovi laughed when she read it just once, then asked what I wanted to do. I told her nothing. A misunderstanding is when someone hears the wrong time for dinner. What Vesta had done was not misunderstanding. It was management. She had managed the story, the room, the family name, and my humiliation until the file broke open under a judge's hand. I did not need her regret. I needed distance, and the court gave me that in writing. The settlement came with numbers, signatures, and silence from Kieran's side. I received my fair share, plus payment connected to the false claims they had used in the filing. More important than money, though money matters when you have rebuilt your life from ash, was the official correction. My record was clean. My name was no longer attached to the Salt Lark as the woman who made the mistake. The mistake had owners now. Real ones. Named ones. Kieran sold part of his interest in Rusk and Keel before the summer ended. Farron disappeared from Brindle Harbor before the first tourist boats came in. Vesta remained in her white house above the harbor, but people stopped lowering their voices when she entered rooms. That may sound small. In a town like ours, it is not. As for me, I did not go back to my old job. That surprised some people. They thought clearing my name meant returning to the same desk, the same radio, the same night shift where the lie began. But I had changed too much to stand in the exact shape of my old life. Instead, I started consulting for small harbor offices along the coast, teaching younger workers how to protect their logs, their access codes, their incident reports, and themselves. I told them what I wish someone had told me when I was still young enough to believe truth could defend itself without help. Write it down. Save the original. Do not let powerful people rush you into silence. A clean record is not just paperwork. Sometimes it is the only witness willing to stay. One evening in late September, I walked out to the breakwater alone. The water was dark blue, almost black, and the air smelled like salt, cold iron, and the first serious hint of fall. I had my father's compass in my pocket. I took it out and watched the needle settle. North was still north. It had been there the whole time, even when I had been too tired to look. I thought about the girl Vesta had called a harbor girl like it was an insult. I thought about the wife who had stood in expensive rooms trying to become acceptable to people who needed her beneath them. I thought about the woman in courtroom 4 who had finally heard a judge read the truth into the air. They were all me. I did not hate any of them, not even the quiet one. She had survived long enough to bring me here. So if you take anything from what happened to me, let it be this. When someone powerful calls you not good enough, listen carefully. Sometimes they are not describing your worth. They are revealing the size of the lie they need you to carry. And if you have a file, a message, a record, a date, a witness, anything real, do not throw it away just because your voice shakes. Keep it. Protect it. Let time sharpen it. Because one day, someone may stand in a public hallway and try to finish you with one cruel sentence. And 5 minutes later, the right door may open, the right judge may turn a page, and the truth may finally answer in a voice no one can interrupt. That was my story. My mother-in-law said her son should have married someone better. Maybe he should have. But better was never the woman with the silk scarf, the family name, or the yacht club smile. Better was honesty. Better was courage. Better was refusing to let another person drown under a lie you helped launch. Kieran never married better because he never became better. And me? I stopped asking that family to see my value. I let the record show it. I let the court say it. And then I walked back toward the harbor with my compass in my hand, lighter than I had been in years. The tide was coming in. The gulls were loud. And for the first time in a long time, none of it sounded like warning. It sounded like freedom. Commentary, lesson, and explanation. Now let's step back from the events of the story and really talk about what happened here, because this was not just a simple courtroom drama. This was a story about reputation, silence, class, power, marriage, family control, and the dangerous way a lie can become stronger when decent people stay quiet for too long. Hollis Fenwick did not lose her peace in one single moment. She lost it slowly. She lost it at dinner tables where people smiled while insulting her. She lost it in polite rooms where everyone pretended not to hear what was being said. She lost it when her husband allowed his family to treat her like an outsider. And most painfully, she lost it when a mistake she never made was placed on her name so that a powerful family could protect their own image. At the beginning of the story, we see Hollis standing outside courtroom 4. That setting matters. She is not at a wedding, not at a family dinner, not inside her home, not somewhere private where people can twist the conversation later. She is standing in a public legal space, a place where words are supposed to carry weight. And that is exactly where Vesta Rusk chooses to insult her. Vesta says, "My son should have married someone better." Now, on the surface, that sounds like a cruel mother-in-law making a personal attack. But underneath that sentence is the whole emotional structure of the story. Vesta is not only saying Hollis was a bad wife, she is saying Hollis was beneath them. She is saying Hollis never belonged in their family. She is saying class, money, polish, and social approval matter more than truth, loyalty, or character. And this is where the story becomes much deeper than a normal revenge narrative. Hollis does not respond with shouting. She does not slap anyone. She does not break down. She simply holds herself steady. That calmness is important because Hollis has spent her whole life learning how to stay steady in difficult conditions. She grew up near the harbor. She learned tides, emergency calls, weather warnings, and records. Her world was built on responsibility. If you make a wrong call near the water, someone can get hurt. So Hollis understands something the Rusk family does not. Truth is not decoration. Truth is survival. Records are not boring paperwork. They are protection. A log, a timestamp, a signature, an access code, a sealed report. These things can become the only voice left when powerful people try to rewrite reality. When we look at Kieran Rusk, we are not looking at an obviously violent villain. That makes him more dangerous in a realistic way. He is charming. He knows how to appear gentle. He knows how to look wounded. He knows how to make Hollis question herself without directly accusing her. This is a very important point. Some people do not control you by screaming at you. They control you by making you feel unreasonable for noticing the truth. Every time Hollis asks a fair question, Kieran turns it back on her. He makes her feel insecure, suspicious, ungrateful, or cold. That is emotional manipulation with polished manners. He does not need to destroy her confidence all at once. He only needs to weaken it little by little until she starts wondering whether her own instincts are unfair. Vesta, on the other hand, represents social power. She is the kind of person who understands rooms. She knows who matters, who listens, who repeats things, and how to make cruelty sound like concern. She does not have to call Hollis worthless directly every day. She uses smaller phrases. Harbor girl. Refreshingly simple. A better woman would understand. These are not innocent words. They are class-coded insults. They are designed to remind Hollis that she came from working people, not yacht clubs. Vesta's cruelty is elegant, and that is why it is so poisonous. It hides inside manners. Then comes the salt lark accident, which is the real wound at the center of the story. A boat goes out during fog. It should not have been out. Right? There is an accident. Someone needs to take responsibility. But instead of letting the truth stand, the Rusk family turns the situation into a controlled narrative. And notice that phrase in the file. Narrative risk must be contained. That line is chilling because it shows how they saw Hollis. They did not see her as a daughter-in-law, a wife, or an innocent worker. They saw her as a risk to the family story. Once a person becomes a risk in the eyes of a powerful family, they can justify almost anything. They can justify silence. They can justify blame. They can justify damaging someone's job, name, and future. This is one of the strongest lessons from the story. A lie does not always survive because it is believable. Sometimes it survives because the right people benefit from believing it. Brindle Harbor believed the version that made the most social sense. The respected boatyard family could not be careless. The polished son could not be reckless. The yacht club woman could not be involved in something ugly. So who was easiest to blame? Hollis, the working-class wife, the outsider, the woman who did not have a family name powerful enough to protect her. That is why the story hurts, because it shows how communities often choose the version of truth that protects status. For years, Hollis carries the weight of a mistake she did not make. This is not just public embarrassment. This is identity damage. She loses her harbor job. She loses the way people look at her. She loses trust in her marriage. She becomes someone people pity, judge, or quietly avoid. And Kieran uses that damage to make himself look noble. This is an important emotional detail. He does not simply betray her. He profits from her disgrace. He becomes the loyal husband who stood by his wife after her so-called mistake. That is a very cruel kind of theft. He steals the truth, gives her the blame, and then takes public credit for forgiving her. Now, let's talk about Hollis's silence, because this is where many viewers may recognize something from real life. Hollis stays quiet because she believes dignity means not fighting in public. She thinks the truth will eventually surface. Many good people make this mistake. They believe if they remain calm, honest, and patient, people will naturally see who is lying. But the story shows us a harder truth. Silence can be noble, but silence can also become useful to the people harming you. When someone is actively building a false story about you, your silence may not look like dignity to the world. It may look like confirmation. That does not mean we should react emotionally to everything. It means we need to understand when a situation requires documentation, boundaries, and formal action. This is why Jovi Hartwell, the lawyer, becomes such an important character. She is not there to turn Hollis into a vengeful person. She is there to help Hollis put the truth into a structure that cannot be easily dismissed. Jovi understands the legal mistake Kieran's side makes. They try to use the sealed accident file as a weapon against Hollis. They think the file carries shame. They assume the mystery around it will make Hollis look guilty. But Jovi sees the opening. If they bring the file into the case, then the court has a reason to examine what the file actually says. This is the turning point. The same object they wanted to use to bury Hollis becomes the object that clears her name. That is excellent dramatic justice because it is not random. It grows naturally out of the villain's arrogance. Kieran and Vesta lose because they overestimate their control. They believe they can use half-truths forever. They believe they can point at a sealed file without anyone opening it. They believe reputation is stronger than evidence. But the judge does not care about their family name. The judge cares about the record. That is why the courtroom scene is so satisfying. The truth does not arrive as gossip. It arrives officially. It arrives through pages, audits, statements, and legal review. The people who controlled private rooms cannot control the record once the court decides to read it. The moment Judge Arkwright opens the file, the power in the room changes. Before that, Vesta has social power. Kieran has family power. Farron has class power. Hollis has almost nothing except memory, patience, and her lawyer. But when the file opens, power moves from image to evidence. The file reveals that Hollis followed procedure. It reveals that her access code had been misused. It reveals Kieran's executive credential. It reveals the late-night departure. It reveals Huxley Parr's protected statement. It reveals Farron's presence on the boat. It reveals the insurance correspondence and the attempt to shift blame. One document does what Hollis's pain could not do for years. It forces the room to look at facts. This is why the story's main revenge is not revenge in a shallow sense. Hollis does not destroy people by lying about them. She does not create a trap out of cruelty. She simply stops protecting the people who harmed her. That difference matters. There is a kind of justice that feels clean because it does not require the victim to become dishonest. Hollis wins because she lets the truth stand in the open. She does not need to become like Vesta. She does not need to manipulate the room. She only needs the full record to be read. Now let's focus on Farron Bellwether. She is called the better woman by implication throughout the story. Vesta sees her as polished, suitable, wealthy, socially correct. But when the truth comes out, Farron is not better at all. She was on the boat. She knew the story was false. She allowed Hollis to carry the blame because protecting her own reputation mattered more than protecting an innocent person. This is one of the sharpest reversals in the story. The woman who looked better on the outside was morally weaker on the inside. The story challenges the audience to ask, what does better really mean? Better clothes? Better family name? Better table manners? Better social connections? Or better character? That question leads us directly to Hollis's strongest line. Your son should have married someone better, but better women do not let innocent people carry their lies, and better men do not ask them to. This line works because Hollis does not completely reject the insult. She turns it. She takes Vesta's own sentence and gives it a moral definition. She says, in effect, you are right to talk about better, but you have been measuring it wrong. That is powerful because the story's final victory is not only legal, it is moral. Hollis redefines worth in front of the very people who tried to define her as less. There is also a strong lesson here about documentation. The story repeatedly reminds us that records matter. Hollis saves schedules, timestamps, dashboards, and copies. At first, these papers do not rescue her immediately, but they protect her sanity. They help her remember that the truth exists even when people deny it. This is very realistic. Sometimes proof does not change everything overnight. Sometimes proof sits quietly in a folder until the right moment arrives. But without it, a victim may be left only with memory, and memory is easy for manipulative people to attack. That is why the line, "Paper remembers what people bury," is one of the central ideas of the entire story. The brass compass is another meaningful symbol. Hollis's father tells her, "When people get loud, look for north." That line is not just about direction, it is about moral orientation. When everyone around you is creating confusion, you need something that brings you back to what is real. For Hollis, the compass represents her father's values: steadiness, honesty, patience, and survival. She touches it outside the courtroom, not because it has magic power, but because it reminds her who she was before the Rusk family tried to rename her. At the end, when she stands near the water and watches the compass needle settle, it shows that her life is no longer controlled by their lie. North was always there. She simply had to find it again. Another major lesson is that class prejudice can hide inside family drama. Vesta does not hate Hollis only because she is her son's wife. She hates what Hollis represents. Hollis comes from labor, not luxury. She understands the harbor from the working side, not the yacht club side. To Vesta, that makes her inferior. But the story reverses this too. Hollis's working class background is not a weakness, it is the source of her strength. Because she grew up around real consequences, she respects procedure. Because she worked with logs and emergency calls, she understands records. Because her family valued honest work, she does not panic when polished people try to shame her. The very background Vesta mocked becomes the reason Hollis survives. We should also pay attention to the ending. Hollis does not go back to the exact life she had before. This is important. Many stories end with the hero getting the old job back, the old house back, the old status back, but Hollis chooses something more mature. She does not simply return to the same harbor desk where the pain began. She becomes a consultant and teaches others how to protect themselves through records, safety procedures, and documentation. That means her suffering becomes wisdom. She does not let the wound stay only a wound. She turns it into guidance. That is a deeper form of victory. And what about forgiveness? The story does not force fake forgiveness. Kieran comes to the porch and tries to explain himself. He spreads blame around the room. He says he never meant for things to go that far. But Hollis understands the truth. People often say they did not mean for the damage to become large, when what they really mean is they expected the lie to stay convenient. She does not scream at him. She does not beg him. She simply names what he did. "You let me lose my name so you could keep yours." That line closes the emotional door. Not every ending needs a dramatic punishment. Sometimes the strongest ending is when the victim no longer needs an apology to move forward. Vesta's non-apology also deserves attention. She offers regret for any misunderstanding. That is not accountability. That is reputation management. A misunderstanding is accidental. What Vesta did was intentional. She managed the story, protected her family, and treated Hollis like a disposable shield. The story teaches us to recognize the difference between apology language and accountability language. Real accountability names the harm. Fake accountability softens it until nobody has to feel guilty. By the final scene, Hollis is not the same woman who stood silently at family dinners. She is still calm, but her calmness has changed. In the beginning, her silence protects the wrong people. By the end, her calmness protects herself. That is growth. The story does not teach us to become loud all the time. It teaches us to become clear. There is a difference. Hollis learns that dignity is not the same as disappearing. Peace is not the same as surrender. And patience is not the same as letting other people write your story. So, what can we learn from this? First, when people attack your worth, look at what they are trying to protect. Vesta's insult was not really about Hollis being less. It was about Vesta's fear that the truth would expose her family. Second, keep records when something serious happens. Screenshots, dates, messages, signed papers, reports, and original copies can matter more than emotions when the time comes to prove what happened. Third, do not confuse social status with character. The person who looks polished may still be the one hiding the ugliest truth. Fourth, do not carry blame that does not belong to you. Compassion is good, loyalty is good, patience is good, but none of those things require you to become a container for someone else's lie. And finally, this story reminds us that truth does not always arrive quickly. Sometimes it waits inside a file. Sometimes it waits inside a witness statement. Sometimes it waits in a record nobody bothered to read fully because the powerful version was easier to believe. But when truth finally enters the right room, it does not need to shout. It only needs to be opened, read, and placed where everyone can see it. That is why Hollis Fenwick's story matters. It is not just about a mother-in-law being cruel. It is about a woman who was told she was not good enough by people who were not honest enough to judge her. It is about a husband who used his wife as cover. It is about a family that confused reputation with morality. And it is about one quiet woman who finally allowed the record to speak louder than every insult ever thrown at her. So when Vesta said, "My son should have married someone better," she thought she was ending the conversation. But she was really walking into the first honest definition of better she had ever heard. Better is not money. Better is not a family name. Better is not a silk scarf, a yacht club smile, or a polished lie. Better is courage. Better is truth. Better is refusing to let an innocent person drown under blame just because silence is convenient. And in the end, Hollis did not need Vesta's approval. She did not need Kieran's apology. She did not need the town to love her. She needed the truth restored to its proper place. Once that happened, she could walk back toward the harbor with her compass in her hand and her name finally clean. That is the real lesson of this story. When people try to bury you under their lie, do not become the lie. Keep your north, keep your proof, keep your voice ready, because one day the file may open and everything they buried may begin speaking for you. The end.